These are all the parts you need to build the EasyDrone Freestyle. It comes in the kit and it's really easy to assemble because there's no soldering involved. So it's just like a grown-up version of a Lego set. Here's how to build it, starting with the frame. This is the main plate of the frame that everything goes onto. So we're going to start by setting up all the arms on the frame and sandwiching all the arms down with this top plate here. I'm going to grab my screwdriver, the 2mm screwdriver, and one of the short screws, and I'm going to get all 4 of the holes on the edge started. Now that we've got all the screws in the arms started, you should be able to rotate all the arms and make sure the second screw holes for the arms are lined up. Then for these really long screws are used. So we'll get all 4 of these long screws started, and then we'll screw them all the way in. Now to screw these long ones in, it's easy to screw them in if you get them all started. Then you set your drone on a piece of tape or something like this so that they have somewhere to go. And just start screwing them in really fast by spinning the small part of your screwdriver with your fingers. It makes pretty quick work of a pretty long screw, saves you a bit of time. So get that screw in, we can finish all the other 3, and then we'll jump to the next part. Now that we've got the 4 long screws in, we can put the arm protectors on. These are just little plastic pieces that snap onto the ends of the arms. There's one, and the bottom part actually has the 2 little bumps on it, and it goes on the side of the frame opposite from where the 4 long screws are sticking up. Now these arm bumpers are meant to be a little tough to get on because you don't want them snapping off. Even though they are held in the screws at the bottom, you don't want the top part bending over and coming off of your frame when you get in the crash. Now that you've got your arm bumpers on, the next step is the motors. Now all the motor screws are in a little baggie. They're the 5mm screws because they need to go through your arms as well as the little TPU printed part. So we'll dump all those out and we'll start putting the motors on. It doesn't matter which way your motors go on your frame. I can put this one here, here, or on the other 2 arms. It's really easy to set the motor direction up in your software after you get the drone built. A quick tip for putting your motors on faster is to get 2 opposing screws on. Once you've got the 2 opposing screws started, it'll be really easy to find the spots for your remaining 2 screws. If the screw doesn't go in, just take a look at the hole and you can give the motor a little push side to side to get that screw started. And there we go, that screws right in. Now that we've got that first motor on, let's repeat it for the other 3 arms before moving on to the next step. And again, if you're having trouble getting a screw in, just take a look down the hole, make sure it's lined up nice before you try to put your screw in. Before we put our ESC in place, just go through, make sure all your screws are nice and tight because we don't want our motors coming off when we're flying. Now that all your motor screws are nice and tight, let's put our ESC on. So if we take a look at our drone frame, the little notch cut out right here, if you can see that, that's where, that's the direction that these wires need to go. So grab our little baggie with our blue pieces in it and dump those out. These little blue pieces need to be put in the holes in the ESC so that the bigger part is facing the bottom, and the bottom is the part that all of the solder joints are not on. So let's put those in. Got our first one through, so let's do the other 3. And then putting these in, it's pretty easy to put in. You just have to mash that little top piece in until it gets all the way through the hole. and you should be nice and set. So let's get this inserted on our metal screws that are sticking up. Just push it down until it's nice and flush at the bottom. And now these motor wires, we want to wrap them around the screws like this and plug them into our motors. Boom. Your motors and your ESC is successfully on the drone. So what we're going to do next is we're going to grab one of these little zip ties here, and there's a slot in the frame by each of the screw holes. We're actually going to zip tie the wires down through that slot. So if you push the zip tie through there and you get it started, you can make sure that your wires are nice and flat on the frame before you actually secure that zip tie down. So let's get those wires nice and flat, then we can push that zip tie down. Then you can cut the excess off the zip tie with just a little scissors you can find at any household. So let's zip tie the other 4 down and then we're good to go. Now that we've got these wires zip tied, we can take a little piece of electrical tape about a couple inches long. I'll do it about 2 or 3 inches. And we'll actually just wrap them around the arm to keep the MR30 connector nice and secure so it won't be going anywhere. This electrical tape is really easy to take off if you need to unplug one of your motors, so that's why we're using it to hold your MR30 connectors down. And again, one of the beauties of this frame is if you ever break a motor when you're out flying and you want to put a new one on, it's that easy to do. All you have to do is unplug it. The next step to this build is putting your flight controller on. So with the flight controller, we have to put the same grommets on, these little blue things through the bottom. And the bottom is going to be the side without all the wires soldered onto it. So we're going to push that little top part through that hole again, making sure to use our fingernail to get every little last bit of it through. And we'll repeat this for the other 3. Now that the flight controller is on, the side of our ESC with wires sticking out of it is going to be the side of the ESC with this little plug on it. So with that plug on the top, we're going to put our flight controller on our stack after we use these little blue spacers. So we're actually going to push these little blue spacers onto those metal screws coming up, and then we're going to push our flight controller down, and this little plug just fits nice and snug into there. To hold the flight controller down, there's 4 of these little clear, or maybe they're black for your kit, but there's these little 4 clear little nuts that we can screw onto these bolts. Now you only need to get these about finger tight. They're not going to go anywhere with the resistance from those little rubber grommets that we stuck in there. Now that we've got our flight controller mounted, the next best thing to work on is actually our camera. So the camera comes with 6 screws. It comes with 2 slightly smaller screws to fit the adapter onto the camera, and then it uses 4 larger screws to hold the adapter into the brackets that can be inserted in the frame. So let's start off with the adapter. You look closely in the back of the adapter, there's 2 little nuts inserted into the adapter, and the one hole without the nut in it, when you pop your camera in, the plug in your camera should be aligned up with that one little hole. So let's get our camera screwed into the adapter. Now these screws, even though they are really small, they still use the 2mm screwdriver. Now that we've got our camera screwed into the adapter, we can screw it into the frame. So this big chunk in your bracket used to mount your camera onto your drone, that actually has to go up. And then this arc has to go on the back of the drone. So we can pop those in place, and we can see that using the center and the bottom holes in this camera, they actually go perfectly into the frontmost hole in this little bracket and that little curved area in the bottom, so that you can actually adjust your camera angle slightly to whatever you like it. So let's grab these little brackets and pop our screws into them and get them finger started into this camera adapter. And just when you're starting it, be in mind that the plug is the top of the camera, so make sure your camera is going to be facing the right way up when you're doing this. Now it's easy to get these screws started when the adapter is not in the frame, so just pop it off, make sure you've got the right orientation, and screw it in. Again, the plug on the camera is the top side of the camera, so as long as that plug is on the top side, once you've got this mounted, you'll be good to go. We can push our adapter brackets into our frame, and we're actually going to use a smaller 1.5mm screwdriver to get the screws tightened. And before you tighten your screws, make sure you pick the camera angle of your drone. We're picking about 20 degrees here. That's about perfect for beginners so they can get a nice steady forwards flight without having to fly too fast. Again, if you look at that, the plug of the camera is on the top, as well as the big chunk that's taken out. And this arc that's in the back of the little bracket, that's facing your camera. That's facing your camera plug back here, your flight controller, and your ESC. Now that your camera adapter and your camera brackets are all in place, we can take the plug and plug it into our camera. Your camera's all done, and the next step is actually going to be putting together one of our 3D printed parts that holds your receiver and your VTX as well as your XT60 plug. When we're putting this 3D printed part on the drone, we're going to want to put all our standoffs on our drone first. So taking these screws, we're going to push them up through the bottom, and then we're just going to use the standoff, and actually we're going to twist the standoff instead of the screw. We're just going to get these finger tight. There's 8 of these little adapters, so screwing them in might take a minute, but it's required for the next step of this build. If it's tricky to screw them in when your camera's plugged in, it's the beauty of having a plug system. You can just unplug your camera, get your standoff screwed in, and once you've got them in, just put that camera right back where it's supposed to go. For our 3D printed piece here, we're going to put our receiver in it first. If you look at the 3D printed piece, you might have to use your little screwdriver to get it open. There's a little flap. When that little flap is pried open, we can actually stick our receiver in there. There's little holes for the wire to come out of this side, which will keep it nice and protected. It'll keep it from rattling around at the drone, and it'll give us a little nice area where we can stick a screwdriver up from the bottom of the drone and actually click the bind button without having to take our drone apart. So again, if we use our little screwdriver to get this little flap pried open on the 3D printed part, we can hold it back with our finger, and then making sure the bind button is facing down. If you look at this little part where this little tube is sticking out, that's the bottom side of it. So we'll make sure that's sticking down, and we'll actually feed our wires through here first, our antennas. Make sure they come out of the hole at the other side. And if it's a little tricky, it's alright. You're not going to have to take this receiver out again. It's better to have your receiver nice and secure, with it being a little tricky to get in, than having it bounce around and being really easy to come out. So once your receiver is in your drone, this is not going to be going anywhere. It's nice and secure, and our 2 antennas are sticking out the back, which is awesome. Next step is going to actually be putting our XT60 connector into the same 3D printed piece. So we've designed the XT60 holder so that your batteries can easily go on top of your drone. You can plug them right in and pulling out without having to worry about pulling this piece off your drone. So if we take a look at our 3D printed piece, it has a little part which actually bends out of the way. So we're going to want to open up our XT60 wires, and we're going to want to put that little 3D printed pop out through here, twist it to the side. You can push our XT60 into place, and this pops right through. To hold this in place and secure both of those edges, we're actually going to use a toothpick today. A toothpick is surprisingly strong over such a small area, and it's super light, which is why we're going to use a toothpick. So we're going to take our toothpick, and there's a nice hole in the side where we can just push it through. If you're having trouble pushing it through, you can just push it against the table and then push directly down your 3D printed part. Make sure that toothpick is all the way through, and then you can take your scissors and snip off both sides. You can either use the other half if you're a toothpick that you didn't use, or you can grab another completely new toothpick. We're going to use our other half to push through the other hole in our build. When we were doing our testing, we found that one toothpick is more than strong enough, but we wanted to make a drone that would last no matter what we put it through, so we decided to go with 2. Now that we've got that in there, this XT60 is solid. It's not going to go anywhere. This is going to last you a long time of plugging and unplugging your drone. So now we can actually put it on our frame. We're going to make sure these wires are inside the drone frame. We're going to line up our holes on our standoffs, and we're going to push this 3D printed part down into place. Now your motor wires run right next to your standoffs. So if that doesn't go all the way down, you can use a screwdriver and just hold those motor wires off to the side a little bit while you push this down. Now if it doesn't want to go all the way down, that's okay. These wires are thick and they don't like to bend, so you'll have to push that all the way down when we're doing the final step and putting our top on. Now that we've got our 3D printed piece on here, we can easily take the connector, which only has 3 pins on it, and plug it in, making sure that the red side is connected to the red wire. You don't want different wires going into each other because that could cause your drone to actually fry and not work. The next step is putting our 3D printed back on. This is going to hold our antenna for our VTX and our antenna for our receivers, keeping them nice out of the way of these props, which you could cut them pretty easily, and it's going to keep them nice and durable, so if you get into a crash, this antenna will be able to flex off to the side instead of just snapping. So what we're going to do before we put it on is we're going to run our VTX antenna through it. Now on this little adapter, there is 4 things actually. So the really skinny washer is going to stay on the part, and we're going to push it through the back here. And then on the top, we're going to put our normal washer as well as our nut, and we're going to screw that up nice and tight. Now when you're screwing this in, you can just use a normal prop nut to screw it in, or we can use a little wrench. If you have a little 8mm wrench, this will make it a lot easier. If not, your prop nut will work as well. Your prop nut tool will work. If you have a pliers as well, just grabbing this from the back and making sure you can get this nice and tight is going to help you so that you won't ever have to tighten it again in the future. If you can't and you can only get this finger tight, that will work too. After a crash, you just might have to check and make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. Again, these tools aren't required, but it is nice to have them when you're putting together this part. If you don't have the tools, you can just tighten them with your hands, tighten them with this prop knot, and this will be good to go. So we can actually put our antenna on here right now. Get that nice and tight, and then these 2 antennas from the receiver, we can use those and we can push them up the holes in the build. Holes in this little 3D printed part, so that they will stick out the back and they won't be in the way of any of the props. So I got one of them in, I got the other one in, perfect. So we can slide this onto our frame now, and they'll stick out the back here. So now we can put our VTX on, and we're pretty much done. So the VTX just sits on top like that. We can plug it in to our antenna, and then you're gonna use your big zip tie. If you look on the side here, there's a little hole we can fit our zip tie through to make sure our big bulky VTX isn't going to be going anywhere. If your drone crashes, this can generate a lot of force inside your frame, so we want to make sure this is nice and secure. That VTX looks great. That's not going to be going anywhere, exactly how we want it. Cut that little piece off, and then let's plug our VTX in. The same thing applies to the VTX as it did to the receiver. We want to make sure that the red wire is in line with the red wire so that it doesn't cause any little short circuits. That's everything you need to do to build the EasyDrone. The last step is putting the top on the frame. So like I said, this 3D printed part needs to get pushed down a little bit. So make sure that's nice and pushed down. It's easier to do that screw first to make sure you can get all the other ones in nice and easy. So just push it down, get it started. and get that screw in before you do any of the other screws in the build. Now that we've got that screw, all the other screws should be lined up, and our 3D printed design makes so our VTX doesn't touch into the top. Everything is secure, and this drone is ready to go. So let's get these last of the screws in here. Let's do the 4 back ones first, because we do have a GoPro mount actually that we're going to screw on the front of the drone. So this 3D printed piece makes it so that you can easily mount a GoPro to your drone. So just put that in place and the screws go right through it down into the standoffs. And when you're screwing this front on, just make sure that the little camera thingamajiggies go into place. The camera brackets, they can slide into the top of the frame actually, and they just snap right down so that you can easily secure the camera bracket. Congratulations, you just finished the EasyDrone build. This is a very durable drone that's going to last you a long time. The parts in there aren't going to rattle around at all. And if this is your very first build, make sure you go visit our website to figure out the next steps, and thanks for watching.